Welcome back to Rev'd Up for Sunday, everyone. We're the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm John Kennedy.
And we come to a perennial beloved Sunday, Advent 4, Year C, and we get to hear about Mary, and we hear her song, the Magnificat. So let's hear about her visit to her cousin. Here's the text, Luke 1, 39-55, and it says, "In those days Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud cry, 'Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord.' And Mary said, 'My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Well, if I could redo the lectionary, we come about this every several podcasts, I would have 2 John the Baptists and 2 Marys in Advent, because I just think that one isn't quite enough. And this is one that is super full. We get the most that Mary has to say. And we get the Song of Elizabeth too, super important stuff, but just not enough women, and not just like any old women, so to speak. These are major figures.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Not enough Mary or Elizabeth were women in our lectionary, indeed, very much agreed. And this is setting us up for Christmas, for the coming of Christ in such a beautiful way, as, of course, have been the previous Sundays with John the Baptist. Advent 1, not so much. Just kidding. Apocalypse. Anyway, but there's so much here that in the Magnificat, for instance, all of these Old Testament themes and promises are being echoed, and Mary is saying here that they are being fulfilled now. It's a very powerful thing. And also narratively, the way that Luke tells the story in chapter 1, we have Genesis echoed with Zechariah and Elizabeth. An interesting thing is that in Matthew's gospel, the evangelist ties in the story, the birth of Jesus, to Genesis by starting with a genealogy, right? And talking about Abraham begat Isaac and so on. Luke does it in a more literary way by echoing Abraham and Sarah with Zechariah and Elizabeth. They are actually the only 2 couples in all the scriptures who conceive a child, have a child, even though the man and the woman are both too old, and the woman therefore is barren, as the scriptural language says. So we have that echo. But then, so that's the going back to the beginning, and then it spans the entirety of the scriptures, because we also have the appearance of the angel Gabriel, who I know is not in today's passage, but just to sort of set this up a little bit. And Gabriel only appears in the Old Testament in Daniel, which in the Jewish canon of the scriptures really appears quite close to the end. And so we have the whole story sort of in view, referenced, and in some ways coming to its fulfillment here. So it's very powerful.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the idea that Mary sets out and goes with haste, I read something interesting that it's the same word used that God gives to the Israelites to eat their sacrificial lamb with haste at the Passover. And then, they're about to go out from Egypt. And here Mary is setting out to go to the hill country. And, she's going to visit her cousin and they're going to have this amazing connection. And then, Elizabeth's going to revere what's happening to Mary and even bow down to her. And I'll compress what I read in a short thing, but the idea was, in this narrative I read, was that when the people went out, they had the Ark of the Covenant with them.
Right, yeah.
And they were bearing it forward. And here's Mary coming, bearing, she's like the new Ark, bearing the presence of God into the world. And Elizabeth is, singing and leaping for joy the way that they would have danced before the Ark.
Yeah.
So I thought that was another kind of Old Testament echo.
I'm leaping out of my little Elizabethan, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't think having eyes to see and hear, what you're talking about with the reverberations and echoes of the scriptures. But absolutely what you say is true, that first of all, Ein Karen, which is the town where this takes place, and Ein Karen in the Judean hillside is beautiful. Ein Karen means something like the beauty of vineyards, or the spring of vineyards, I think is what it means. And the church of the Visitation is way up on this hill, looks down over this valley, and the Judean countryside, it's considered to be the same place where David brought the Ark of the Covenant when he got it back from the Philistines. He didn't want it because he thought, he was going to be struck dead, and he left it with these people, and all kinds of great stuff happened. And then he went and got it. But yes, that Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant. She's the new temple. That's what's happening here. This is big.
Yeah, and it's brilliant storytelling.
Brilliant,
as you said, John. Yeah.
Yeah. I love this Mary's Ark of the Covenant thing. Obviously, we're sounding very Roman Catholic here. And to go along with that, back to Gabriel in the book of Daniel. When Gabriel speaks in the book of Daniel, in chapter 9, he makes a prophecy. He says, after 70 weeks of years, and maybe I'll just bracket that, we might come back to that, but after this span of time, everlasting justice will be introduced. We hear that theme very much in the Magnificat, and of course we'll talk about that. Vision and prophecy will be ratified, and a Holy of Holies will be anointed. And of course Mary can very much be interpreted as this Holy of Holies who bears the divine presence in a new kind of way.
Well, I'm, here your name is Elizabeth, and we're talking about Elizabeth, so we should defer all things to you, Elizabeth.
Shine the light on me, Bob.
Bright lights, big city.
Yeah.
Bright lights, little town. But I think that one of the things that we have here is the make haste. I mean, Mary could have been stoned to death for what happened. We have two women who are related, both of whom are, to say the least, unlikely choices here. We have as you mentioned, John, at the outset, we have a woman who's too old and is biblically barren, so to speak, and then we have a young girl who's seemingly too young and has a mysterious. Not married and has a mysterious paternity there, and they come together. And at Ein Karen, the statue, there's this incredible statue in the courtyard next to the church, and it's two women together being touched by their bellies, and that's what the John and Jesus are getting together in the womb. And because of John and Jesus, because of their holiness, it makes each of these women holy. None of the women are complaining, are claiming holiness on their own. They're made holy by being the vessels of these most holy. And then they come together and they're touched by the Spirit and they have their songs of joy. And I just got to say one more thing. I'm trying not to talk too much, but I just think this is so cool. When it says that Elizabeth exclaimed, that is the same word that is used in the Hebrew scriptures for the chanting before the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, wow. There's a lot there.
That's very powerful.
Yeah. Well, also their meeting is it's like a precursor to the meeting of John and Jesus at the riverside too. I mean, here there's the whole diptych, the whole kind of like parallel narratives of their birth, their conception, and everything. As you've already alluded to, Hannah's story, and then Abraham and Sarah's story. Here we have Elizabeth and Mary's story, and they're not like in lockstep because they're they're not supposed to be, right? Like Elizabeth is the elder, the wiser at this point, and she's going to submit herself to Mary and bow down to her, and it's what John's going to do too. And so here kind of Elizabeth is speaking for her son John, and Elizabeth speaking for her son Jesus when they greet each other and have this exchange. I think that's just really cool.
Yeah. And how about the fact that Elizabeth is a prophet, just the way her son's going to be a prophet?
Yeah.
I mean, she knows all this stuff. She knows Mary's pregnant. She knows what the child's going to be like. She knows.
News travel fast for.
Well, the news is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes because it's just she's caught up in the Spirit. So we always talk about Elizabeth, Zechariah coming from a line of priests, but and then he becomes a prophet. But I'm saying his mom is a prophet here too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And what she says here becomes the basis for the Hail Mary. Right? It's the second part of the prayer. The Hail Mary is first taken from what Gabriel says to Mary in the previous passage. Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you. And then it picks up here with what Elizabeth says. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. So just really beautiful how what Elizabeth says here has been memorialized. And just interesting to see how prayers that people have lived with and have been formed by, and that brings so much solace and closeness to God over so many years. Just really interesting to see their scriptural roots.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it would be almost impossible to overstate the importance of the Hail Mary, full of grace, that prayer. And I'm only sorry that as you guys know, coming on 30 years of an ordained priesthood, I now bemoan and moan the division we have between Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, this and that. We have just cast out spiritual treasures because we have judged them. And all these traditions that have misjudged the power of prayer to Mary and the Hail Mary have really, really lost out on a major pathway into the divine life.
Yes. Yes. I couldn't agree more. Even though obviously I'm Episcopalian, my whole family, on both sides, all Irish Catholic lineage. So my grandmother had a very deep devotion to Mary, and I got that from a very early age. And indeed, Mary is a very, very powerful pathway and sort of companion, and somebody who can bring us very close to God. And I'm very grateful for having that sort of formation. And it is a shame, and it's really silly that Protestants have sort of closed the door on Mary by and large, because she's there for us.
Yeah, I think her story it also has been kind of made monolithic and disconnected from this narrative and from the whole arc of her life, and the fact that she was a lowly, poor, just unimportant person. And she's been made into this exalted demigod in some way. So I think that the lack of proportion on both sides and every side of the equation is just flawed. And, anytime that we're, becoming unmoored from the story is we risk kind of blowing everything out of proportion or not giving it its due. And anyway, I'm not Catholic, but I love Mary just for who she is and what she did. And my mother tells a story about Mary coming and sitting at the end of her bed when she was like 14. My mom was like 14 as a great comfort in a moment of fear for her. And my mom's like hardcore Protestant, I would say. And it just happened to her. So, I mean, Catholics don't have a corner on Mary. I think that these presences are sent by God to, we have messengers coming to us all the time, and Mary's a great one. But just to stay here could we, I don't know, come back to the text. We have, they're cousins. They're like, and Mary, I love their relationship that Mary runs to her first. She knows Elizabeth's pregnant. I mean, they're probably all amazed, and they've had 6 months to talk about it. And however they communicated, I don't know how far apart they are
WhatsApp.
here. You must know how far.
Yeah, it's about...
They use WhatsApp.
It's WhatsApp.
Yeah. I mean, it's a walkable walk. It's a long walk. It's down below the far side of where Mary and Martha.
But obviously she knew Mary Elizabeth had, conceived, because I don't know. It just seems like she would have gone to her because she knew.
Yeah, I mean, I think the part I like about it, I mean, I'm super into the relationship with each other and the way we might read that relationship, read into that relationship, and to understand that Elizabeth, we don't give Elizabeth enough credit. She doesn't get enough airtime in our tradition. That Elizabeth gives her shelter from the storm, and from the shelter in the storm, she gets set free. I mean, it's by Elizabeth's hospitality that Mary can claim who she is.
Yeah,
that's what happens.
So well said. Yeah, incredible.
Interesting. Perhaps we can just talk about the text of the Magnificat, because the Mary that comes here, I think, is very recognizable in some significant ways in the Mary of a lot of popular piety and imagination, rejoicing in God, emphasizing the mercy of God, and filling the hungry with good things, helping God's people, and fulfilling his promises. That this is all, I think, very consonant with how Mary exists in the imagination of so many people. But there's an edge here too, right?
Yeah.
Especially for those of us who are comfortable, and certainly by the measure of the world, and certainly by the measure of how most people in the time and the place of the Scriptures lived, we are quite comfortable that he sent the rich away empty, and so on, and has brought down the mighty from their thrones. So Mary has a prophetic edge that I think is often lost.
Yeah, I mean, we've said a lot already about how much of the Old Testament is embedded here and echoed in this story and all the way through from the beginning of Luke. And here Mary is like, as we said in last week's podcast, that these people are so steeped in their story and their scriptures. And here Mary is, singing a song that Hannah sang, and with her own words, I guess, but it echoes the Psalms, it echoes the prophets, it echoes Hannah. So she knows, she has a song in her heart already from her own tradition, and I feel like she feels it resonating in her so strongly, which I think is powerful to think about in itself, that she would be so familiar with her teachings and her ancestors and the formative stories. Like, it begs the question, how much are we formed, that we would break into song from our scriptures and prayers when something happens to us. Some people are and do that. But I think, Mary is like the incarnation of her whole tradition. She's just containing it all, the whole span of it in her song and in her story.
Yeah, isn't that cool? I mean, I like the way you say that. I think of this a little bit as a sort of metanoia moment, back to my being annoyed with metanoia a week ago or 2 weeks ago, that Mary has a moment of inspiration, prophetic inspiration, and in a kind of heart turn. I think that the women are having what we would call mystical experiences here, and that we get to share in the verbal veil that is pulled back, and that this is a Hebrew story. These are two Hebrew women, right? This is their language. They know this the way we can talk about the things that we love in our lives. It just pours out, and that it pours out, and it pours out. In this new world order coming through her child. That's what this is, a new world order that's going to come through her child. But it's inspired speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what Mary talks about in terms of this new world order coming about is very much in keeping with and echoing the Old Testament. I mean, we've talked about the Song of Hannah already, and this is very, very similar. But one important difference between whether it's the Song of Hannah or the Psalms that it echoes is that whereas those Hebrew texts and songs look forward to a future fulfillment, Mary is saying that this has happened, that the fulfillment has arrived. And so therefore it looks forward to Jesus. And certainly of all the Gospels, Luke's Jesus is the clearest about the sort of social justice and reversals where God favors the poor and the lowly and the hungry, and sends the rich away empty and brings down the mighty from their thrones. Luke's Jesus is clearest and strongest on that. For instance, in his Sermon on the Plain, the Lucan parallel to Matthew's more famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus simply says, "Blessed are the poor." Matthew says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," right? Which sort of broadens and makes a little more vague the meaning of that, whereas it's a bit more direct in Luke. So very much themes that are constant through Jesus's ministry, and a new world order has come. And I think the invitation is to not cling to what we think we need to be okay, and to accept the reign of God, the ordering of the world and the values of God that Jesus is bringing about. And it requires a great letting go. And if we won't let go, then these are words of warning to us. But if we will sort of yield and be humble like Mary and Elizabeth, and this is all good news. And still challenging.
Well, this is the most Mary says in the Bible.
Yes.
I think we hunger for Mary's voicing, frankly.
Yes.
And as we have attached a little bit of what you were saying earlier, attached things to Mary through time, and Mary showing up for your mother, and Mary showing up over and over, has her own. In these situations, and sometimes you might get this in Our Lady of Guadalupe. I'm going to stay close to the scripture here, but we get that when Mary shows up, her very being in showing up for people is able to convey the divinity of things, and that what she's really demonstrating a kingdom of humility here, and that's what she conveys in her presence in the scriptures and conveys in her presence when there's apparitions of her too.
I mean, Luke's our famous gospel for preferential treatment of the poor.
Yes.
I think Jesus is constantly focused on the poor in Luke. And here's his mother is a poor woman and brings him in.
Yeah, and Luke's gospel says more about the role of women than any of the other gospels. And if you take a look at chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, where you see he's naming the women. These are the women that basically did all the work. Men moved around, and they were full-on disciples. They were not. There's no JV team here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's very moving. And so this is, I guess we're nearing the end of our time this morning, but is there more that we want to touch on here with the Magnificat, or any other big topics we haven't talked about for this passage?
Yeah, if I could just say one last thing here.
Please, yeah.
Elizabeth, I do think that you're a very Magnificat person in your view of things. And John, you have your own gifts and views, and I have my own gifts and views. And but this is something that is important to you. And I think that what we see here is very important as this dovetails with the Christmas story. We go from the magnificence of the heavens and the angel's story here, and you already talked about Gabriel showing up here, and we get the magnificence of that, and we go from the magnificence of the heavens to the Magnificat. This is the whole. If we were going to put it on a kind of a low and high, that the divine is so present in the lowly.
Yeah.
And this is part of the Christmas story, and it's echoed through and throughout this whole story.
Yeah. Just two things. One, very briefly, I think that what you're saying makes me think of how these Advent texts, I think, calibrate us for Christmas if we really take it to heart, because Christmas and the story and the imagery so easily just becomes saccharine and sentimental and kind of spiritually empty, if I might be so blunt, without this sort of context and this sort of meaning and these stories and these values. So I think they're so important in that way. Another thing is, Elizabeth, you were talking a few minutes ago about how Mary, because the scriptures and the story live inside of her, she just sort of spontaneously produces this music. Although interesting sidebar, a lot of scholarship suggests that these hymns might have been circulating elsewhere and were sort of grafted into the story. Nonetheless, this is certainly the story we get, and so on. So staying with that, and how beautiful it is to have the scriptures and the story so alive in you that they can just come out spontaneously in moments of joy and moments of praise. Well, as Anglicans, not exclusive to our tradition, but certainly part of our tradition, in evening prayer, sort of nightly, the Magnificat is appointed, this very text. And this is a way to really let these words and the spirituality really become part of our spiritual DNA. And it's a beautiful, beautiful practice that is available to anybody.
Well, and I know we have to land the plane here, but I just keep saying I know, and then I speak again. Sorry about that. But I mean, here we have what the gifts that Luke gives us, just what you're talking about, which come out in our morning and evening prayer here. We get the Nunc Dimittis, which we're going to get to in a little bit. We get these songs, and I know that the Magnificat is front and center in our tradition. I just feel like I want to use this podcast to say I want to yank Elizabeth from the back row and move her up. I think that what Elizabeth has to say, she is the first one to drop that Jesus is Lord, and almost does it conversationally. Nice. I don't think she gets enough credit here in the hierarchy of
That's
our
awesome.
biblical saints. I think that Elizabeth, what she's doing in this visitation is very, very beautiful and very major and very sublime.
It's gorgeous. It's such a graceful way. I feel like the early church made sense of who John the Baptist was vis-a-vis Jesus, because at first everyone was like, well, wait, Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. Isn't that a little complicated that he would have submitted himself to be like a disciple of John? And they had to come to grips with that, with Jesus being superior. And I love that they give it to the mothers to really put it in order and let them do it so beautifully and give us these great words. It's incredible. And by being, if I receive your comment about me being a Magnificat person, I wouldn't say I embody this very well in my life, but it's become really important to me not to miss how much Jesus stands on the side of the poor. And I guess, that's what's important to me in my more recent understanding about who Jesus is and what he represents, how he represents God to us in the flesh. And so I just wanted to, say that, but thank you for that. So I don't know, should we wrap it up, let people get their Christmas presents wrapped?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. This is beautiful Advent, and it's not over yet. So please, enjoy this podcast, and we'll see you in church on Sunday. And we wish you all a very joyful and blessed Christmas.